Laura Kuhnsberg there, our political editor. Well, let's discuss all of this now. Joining me from Southampton, the Eurosceptic Conservative MEP Daniel Hannan, and from our Brussels studio, it's Daniel Gross, Director of the Centre for European Policy Studies and an advisor to the European Parliament. Daniel Hannan, thank you very much to you first of all. David Cameron says he's going in to bat for Britain tonight. Do you wish him luck?
Well, he's actually abandoned not just the things that I think most people who cared about our national independence cared about, but the things that he was promising only a year or two ago. He was talking then about opting out of social and employment policy, curbing the European Court of Justice, disapplying the Charter of Fundamental Rights, taking back criminal justice policy. All of this has been dropped, and we're left with token, symbolic, optical changes that won't change anything, that won't require a new treaty. I think basically the deal has already been done because there isn't really anything that needs changing. All that needs to be done now is to stage the row. There has to be a little haka of synthesized aggression where Britain pretends to ask for things and the other member states pretend to consider them so that it looks as though something has changed.
Daniel Gross, do you go along with that? Do you think this is going to be a staged, manufactured row and then there'll be a nice cosy compromise at the end of it and David Cameron can come back to London and say he's won a magnificent victory?
Well, that's the problem. Can he actually sell whatever he achieves as a magnificent victory? Or has he come back and say it's an honorable defeat, but that's the best I could get? That's up to him to decide. But it is true that the EU cannot change its nature just for one member. A lot of it has been decided over the last decades, and that is not up for discussion. One can change things at the margin to make a sign towards Britain that the rest of the continent cares for the country, but not much more.
And Daniel Hannan, you say that there's going to be a stitched-up deal, but at the same time, it looks very difficult to get a deal, to get a compromise on this question of in-work benefits, doesn't it?
That's what you're supposed
migrants?
to think, Ben. That's why it's being rigged in this way. Look, I mean, you just heard our other guest confirm this, and everyone in Brussels knows this, But I would ask viewers to ask themselves the following question. If, as you've just heard, the EU really is incapable of making substantive concessions, meaningful changes, when its second largest economy is about to hold a referendum on leaving, imagine how much less accommodating they would be the day after we had voted to remain. I mean, if this is how we're treated now, or when we're about to vote on whether to walk out, if we voted to stay in, we would be being walked all over from now onwards. And that's why remaining in is a bigger risk than voting to leave, which is the safer option.
But at least you are going to get a referendum. Whatever, whether there's a deal or not, or whatever kind of deal it is, there will be an in-out referendum.
And in that referendum, David Cameron will have one vote, and I'll have one vote, and you will have one vote, and everyone watching, if they're a UK or Commonwealth national with residence in Britain, will have a vote. And I hope people will look at the way the world has moved on. We are in the only trade bloc on the planet that is not experiencing any substantial economic growth. All the real opportunities are across the oceans, but as long as we're in the EU, we're not allowed to sign a bilateral free trade agreement with India or China or Australia. The EU is looking like what it is, an unwanted 1950s leftover. We should be where the future is.
Daniel Gross, do you think the other European leaders are a bit fed up with Britain and fed up with Mr Cameron? They've got very serious issues to discuss in Brussels this week. They need to talk about the migrant crisis, the terror threat to Europe and so on. And here's David Cameron putting these demands on the table at this dinner tonight.
Effectively, there's very little appetite to engage in the nitty-gritty detail of his demands. But it's quite clear that in the EU, nobody is being rolled over. Everybody has a voice, and I think Britain is certainly punching above its weight. But it cannot change the nature of the entire idea, which was to have a pooling of sovereignty so that we are stronger in this world which is getting bigger. And on this fundamental point, I think nobody else in the EU really wants to compromise.
And Daniel Hannan, you're talking quite in terms of what Mr. Cameron is trying to achieve here, you don't seem to have great faith in either him or his ambitions. Can I ask you why you are in the Conservative Party? Why not join UKIP, for example?
Oh, no, I'm very pro David Cameron. I voted for him as party leader. I think he's done a cracking job as Prime Minister. You look at the state of the country that he inherited, how indebted it was, how sclerotic and surly it was. You look at the way unemployment has fallen and crime has fallen, the deficit has fallen. I think he's done a great job. I just disagree with him about this one issue.
But it's a fundamental issue, isn't it? Our view of Europe and our place within Europe, it's absolutely fundamental.
Absolutely, it's fundamental, and that's why it's right to have lifted it out of party politics and put it to the country to decide as a whole in a referendum. And you just heard from Daniel Gross, your other guest, that there isn't going to be any fundamental change in the nature of the EU. So if we want the kind of relationship that the Prime Minister was initially looking for, that is to say one based on free trade and cooperation with our friends and allies rather than political amalgamation, rather than what Daniel Gross just called the merger of sovereignty, well then the only way to do it is to vote to leave and negotiate from the outside as a friendly country, as a reliable, dependable ally, but one which is going to live under its own laws, secure in its own independence.
OK. All right. Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. It's a debate, of course, it's going to run right up until the referendum and afterwards, indeed. Daniel Hannan and Daniel Gross, thank you so much for your time tonight.